Bom, primeiramente, obrigada por estar aqui com a gente. Vou apresentar brevemente. Obrigada. Aqui. Vou apresentar o professor, esse aqui é o Fabiano. Ele é do Departamento de Gestão da Vida Selvagem e Ecoturismo da Universidade de Namíbia e graduado em Biologia Ambiental e Ciências da Computação pela Universidade de Namíbia. Ele é mestre em Gerenciamento de Áreas Protegidas, Meio Ambiente e Desenvolvimento pela Universidade de KwaZulu-Natal, em África do Sul, e doutor em Zoologia pela PUC do Rio Grande do Sul. Então, ele morou uns anos aqui no Brasil. E, atualmente, ele está envolvido em vários projetos de monitoramento da biodiversidade na Namíbia, que ele vai falar mais sobre isso agora na palestra. Aí, quando você quiser, Ezequiel, pode compartilhar a tela e a gente pode começar.
Boa noite a todos. Obrigado, Núria e professora, pelo convite. Bem, eu vou fazer a minha apresentação em inglês, mas se houver necessidade de alguma pergunta ou algo assim, se algo não for esclarecido, pode acho, mandar mensagens. Okay, so as Núria mentioned, I will be talking or giving a bit of insights about some of the challenges in conservation that we face in Southern Africa, using the Wupara Conservancy in Namibia as a case study. My presentation has about 3 different components. So initially, I will give a bit of a background into the history of conservation in Namibia, because that's relevant to the second part of the talk, which will then focus on a study that we conducted in the Wupara Conservancy. So Namibia is situated in Southern Africa, bordering to the north Angola, to the south South Africa, and then to the east Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. In terms of area, we are just about 900 square kilometers. From a geopolitical and social demography landscape, the country is divided into 14 different regions, with just about 3 million people, with more than 10 tribes. As you can see in the map, the distribution of the population is not is disproportional. So you have a high density in the northern part of the country, and more to central part of the country, and this has to do with the political history of the country, where post in the prior independence, the community or the population was divided, and this created clusters, and some of these clusters, of course, led to higher population growth. Now, this has implications, as we see later on, in terms of interactions with wildlife, because areas with higher human density are more likely to result in a higher human animal interaction. From a biological perspective, the country is very rich, has a high biological diversity, both in terms of species richness and in terms of endemism. So to the graph on my left side, that's represents or gives an overall picture of the diversity of terrestrial fauna and flora. And to the left, you can see the distribution of endemism, again, in terms focusing only on the terrestrial fauna and flora. What is, you can see that's partially obvious there, is that we have some form of a gradient. So if we just focus on the endemism, we can see that as we move from east to west, as we move from west to east, we have a decline in terms of endemism. Similarly, as we move from west to east, we do have a small change in terms of diversity, with higher concentration more to the central part of the country, and then also more to this stretch here, which is called the Zambezi region, where I'm actually located at that tip, at that corner there. So you have this distribution of biological diversity across the country. The polygons there show the different forms of conservation, with the ranging from communal conservancy to community forests, state protected areas. We will dwell a little bit more on this in the next couple of slides. And now this distribution is then linked or related as well to the rainfall pattern in the country. So Namibia is a highly arid country, as you can see in this picture here, with most of the country to the east, to the west, not receiving much rainfall above 400 millimeters of rainfall per year on average. So we do have a highly adapted fauna and flora to these conditions. Now, this diversity then forms really the basis of for the conservation. So this slide here just transforms or provides an example in terms of how this diversity is transformed into provisional values of terrestrial resources. So thinking in terms of ecosystem services and in terms of bioeconomy. So just focusing on the one on the farthest of my left side, you have distribution of value across in terms of terrestrial resources with higher amounts. This is all in Namibian dollars in per hectare per year. So you can see, for example, the Zambezi region, or the stretch to the east part, has a high provisional value. Similarly, it's also an area with a high provisional value in terms of fresh water, in kilograms per hectare, and also, but in terms of tourism and leisure, then you have a much more spread distribution of the value across the country. But again, you can see that here in Katima Mulilo, the stretch is also an area of high tourism value. Now, underlying this distribution of resources is the basis upon which the evolution of the conservation practices in Namibia is based. So conservation practices in Namibia started around the 20th century and beyond, with the fast protected areas being established, them mostly for as hunting grounds. Some of those that eventually were then converted into protected areas. These were then followed by the establishment of what we call freehold conservancies. So in the second figure in the middle, and here really the concept of conservancy starts to emerge, which is basically the idea behind here is that farmers manage their land as a single unit. So these involve, for example, the removal of fences, and allow in that way allow the free movement of wildlife across a much larger landscape. And then, so this is really constituted sort of what I call the broadly fast era of conservation practice in Namibia. Then we have the second phase, which is just post-independence, whereby Namibia changes the legislation and devolves the right of use and of benefiting from natural resources to the communities. So now here with a particular focus on communal land, and this then led to the formation and the emergence of communal conservancies. Now, communal conservancies are very similar in terms to commercial conservancies, in the sense that, for example, they have to have a constitution, they have to have a monitoring system in terms of their gain and their management, and they have to have reports on an annual basis that are then submitted to the Ministry of Environment and Tourism. And it's on basis, for example, of this wildlife monitoring, for example, that they can, for example, set quotas for conservation hunting or harvesting of resources. Then we move to a new era after that, which is really that focus mostly in the establishment of transfrontier conservation areas. As you can see on the graph on the right-hand side, on the east, we have the Okavango Transfrontier Park, which involves the 5 countries, Angola, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Namibia. And towards the west, we have the Yona Skeleton Transfrontier Park or Conservation Area, which covers pretty much all the west part of the country into Angola. So presently, then, based on this, Namibia has over 45% of the total surface area under some form of conservation or wildlife management, and with more than 80 communal conservancies. One thing I should highlight is that in 1996, so at the onset of the establishment of conservancies, many of these areas had either very low density of wildlife or no wildlife at all. So one of the initiatives that the government implemented was really the translocation of wildlife from protected areas into this communal conservancies, and then increase the natural base in the conservancies. And this leads then really to the topic that I want to talk about, because with this increases this successes in translocation of resources of wildlife into these communal conservancies, they have been very successful. And this figure here just shows the success in terms of increasing wildlife number for species here, focusing, for example, on lions, buffaloes, elephants, and wildebeests. So, and looking across from the 1960 to all the way to 2018. For example, we can clearly see that elephants have been on increase, wildebeests as well. Buffaloes have also been on an increase, although their range is much more restricted. And then also lions, although show a small decrease, they are much higher than they were prior. So this is based really on what number or data is available. So this is part of some of the successes, and this underpins really, as mentioned earlier, the basis upon which conservancies, community conservancies, actually operate. Another success can be seen that with this increase in wildlife, communities can benefit from different services or have different products. So in this slide here, I show simply the example of two communities in the cycle, the red cycle. One is the Quando Conservancy, and one is the Mayuni Conservancy. And if we look at differences in terms of monitoring value, we can see, for example, that Mayuni is way over above 1 million Namibian dollars per year versus and the Quando is slightly less than that. Second to that, we can also see that there are differences in terms of what services or resources our communities benefiting from being in these conservancies. So, for example, in the Quando Conservancy, conservation hunting seems to be a major source of income versus joint venture tourism in the Mayuni Conservancy. So basically, these two figures show that different conservancies have different or offer different products that being to tourism or local, international tourism or local tourism in an area, which needs to be taken into account too, because they are all vulnerable to different shocks. But these are some of the successes in these conservancies. Another measure in terms of that has really been driving this increase in the number of conservancies is management. So each one of those conservancies do have to do a review to look at different aspects of management, ranging from financial accountability to wildlife monitoring, to commitment of the different groups to ensure the success of the conservancies, or that the conservancies meet their goals, and also management. So in this graph here, you can see that some conservancies did not do so well in 2016, while others did fairly well in then. So altogether, there's three pieces. So increases in the number of wildlife, and also with good management, all then contribute to this to increase in benefits that communities can accrue from being part of these conservancies. But on the other hand, this has not been without challenges. So there has been an increase in human-wildlife interactions because, for example, in 1990, the late 90s, the human population and density in some of these conservancies were fairly low relative to present day. So with increase in wildlife, then this creates the ideal conditions to increase wildlife interactions. Unfortunately, most of this have been they have been positive, but they also have been negative. So in this figure here, for example, it's just a picture of a field where communities are trying to minimize the impact of birds by putting plastics in the field, and in that way try to reduce the impact of birds in the field. But as I said, and I already mentioned this figure here really shows, for example, that for example, in terms of elephants, if we look at 3 different periods, and if you remember the initial graph of the human population that is mostly concentrated in the northern part of the country, and we look at the 2020 graph, we can see that there is a high abundance of elephants in this section of the country. But this equally is an area where there is a high human density. So these are some of the challenges that conservancies are facing. Another challenge that, sorry for that overlap there in the image, Another challenge that is being faced, of course, is that communities may need to make more use of forests, for example, due to wood or for timber, and in many ways that may not always be in the most positive towards forest goods, because there is a high demand for resources, both for subsistence but also for commercial purposes. Now, these challenges, another challenge is this graph here, and here I really just want to focus on the total and probably livestock damage. So what this figure shows is challenges in terms of damages that conservancies, and this graph here is across all conservancies in the country, have experienced since 2001 to 2015. We can see that, for example, livestock damage, which is just the yellow, did increase over time and has remained fairly high. We can also see that crops, which is the green, also has increased and has remained fairly high, with a slight decrease towards the latter years. But what really this graph shows is two things: is that there is a high dependency, or sustainable or subsistence agriculture is a fundamental aspect of the livelihood of people in conservancies, or livestock is an integral part of their livelihoods. But at the same time, they are actually facing major challenges in trying to deal with this sort of offset negative impacts from the increase in wildlife numbers. And this really then, looking at this mixture of successes and challenges, has led us to think of conduct a study that we did in the Wupara Conservancy, because after looking at it all, we identified there were a few gaps in knowledge that we do need to understand, both in terms of human perceptions after being in a conservancy for an extended period of time, after having benefited from resources that have accrued by being part of conservancies, but also being exposed to a higher human-wildlife interaction, mostly in the form of conflict, unfortunately. So here in this slide here, basically what we felt is that what happens quite often is that there is a high focus in particular species when we talk essentially about human-wildlife conflict. For example, there's a high focus on elephants and lions and leopards and tigers. But many times, these are just some of the species that are involved in human-wildlife interactions. So then we had mainly two main questions that drove then us to conduct our study. One is that we wanted to gain an understanding of the full taxonomic diversity that's involved in human-wildlife conflict in the Wupara Conservancy, because reports will always are biased towards certain species. So we don't get a full understanding of what's happening on the ground. And that, of course, it's very important if we are to support the communities and also have change in their perceptions towards conservation policies. And the second question that we wanted really to explore were what were the communities, or what are the communities' perceptions about human wildlife and wildlife in general after being conservancies for an extended period of time. So this really then drove us to our study. So in this slide here, this really just a recap. So we wanted to gain that understanding, because with that understanding, we can then inform better or management and conservation plans. So we conduct our study in the Upara Conservancy. It's a conservancy that has been in existence for more than 20 years. It is about 150 square kilometers in surface area, has a high density of about 3.2 individuals per square kilometer. It is located between two national parks. To the north, there is the Mudumu National Park, and then to the south, there is the Casa Rupara National Park. And both parks have a wide range of species, and conservancies don't have fences, so similar equally are the national parks. So there is free movement of species and wildlife from the conservancy to the parks, which is one of the premises of really community-based natural resources, because this movement of wildlife then creates bases for tourism and trophy hunting and conservation hunting in conservancies. We then administered 178 questionnaires to families, to households, exploring a wide range of questions, but mainly focused for here, I'm mainly focused on really gaining understanding of what species are involving in conflict and what different variables inform or influence the perception of communities about wildlife in the area. And for to explore the influence of different variables in the community perceptions, we use the ordinary linear regression to do so. So what then we find out in terms of species involved in taxonomic in conflict. So this figure here shows the different cereals or crops that are cultivated in this area, and we found that there are over more than 11 species involved or that are causing problem-causing species in this area. Elephants were ranked high or mentioned the most, followed by buffaloes and kudus, and then you have the other species such as the warthog, some primates, and including the porcupine. So there is a larger suite of species involved in cooperating than most studies will actually report. In terms of livestock depredation, again, in this graph here shows the percentage, or basically the number of respondents that reported having had their livestock preyed upon by a wildlife. So we have about 10 different predators. Now, when we just focus, for example, on cattle, we can see that lions were ranked fast or had a higher frequency, followed by spotted hyenas. But we also had, for example, crocodiles and honey badgers. For example, crocodiles, the instance of crocodiles are more likely to have happened when animals went to the river, because the conservancies border the river, and that's where these events are likely to have occurred. While for lions and hyenas, this often occur because at times livestock might be left unattended, or at times even when they are in crows, lions are able to deter or jump over the bombers, depending on what material is used to build these enclosures. In terms of poultry, we have a much broader diversity of species involved, ranging from the more small predators such as the wild cat, the spotted genets. We have snakes involved. We have wild dogs involved as well. In terms of goats, we also have lions featured very high, and equally the hyenas, they also feature very high, and also then wild dogs. So again, quite often there is a certain bias that most studies might only focus on the larger predators, but our study really shows that communities do face or are battling with a higher or a larger number of species than just the ones that are often reported. Moving on to another particular aspect that we were interested in is that we also asked the participants to rank this problem-causing species. And this graph just provides a very quick summary where we can see that elephant, as the previous slide already indicated, was really high, had a higher frequency. So it was always ranked as being the most problematic species, followed by lion, and you have baboons and bush pigs. The second ranked species, the highest one, was lion, and you also have baboons, but elephants also feature in there, hyenas also feature in there, kudos also feature in there, and then fourth as well, hyenas and lions also feature in there. And when we look at the least ranked problematic species in this case here, was bush pigs. So overall, this basically reiterates what I already mentioned earlier, that elephants, lions, and hyenas seem to be the most problematic species in this conservancy. Our last question or of interest was then to look at the role of the different socioeconomic demographic parameters in trying to explain community perceptions about human wildlife. Literature does indicate that various parameters, both social and economic and demographic, may play a role. But here we ran a few models, and here I'm only present the 8 variables or parameters that that were part of the top models that we ran. And of this, only 2 variables, which is the annual livestock depredation and the livelihood and the perception that livelihoods are threatened, were significant, in the sense of saying that perceptions of participants that incur livestock depredation could be reinforced in a negative direction by 61%. So that's to say, for example, if a farmer did experience conflict in a particular year, his perception of wildlife will be significantly less than farmers that did not experience livestock depredation in that particular year. And also, same applies to the idea of their perceptions about their livelihoods being threatened. All other parameters, like if there are more species involving conflict, were also important. Age, experience, livestock depredation, but not annual. So there's a difference between the annual livestock depredation, just having experienced livestock depredation over the time that they have been there. Continuous movement of dangerous wildlife, the movement of dangerous wildlife in the area. All these parameters need play a role, but only those 2 really are important. Now, for us, this is really important because from a conservation or perspective of management, it tells us that we do need to take into account not just what communities experience in forms of direct loss of resource, but also their perceptions, because that is shaping. So basically, if they feel threatened, we also have to engage in that dimension. So basically, summarizing or looking forward, what we found basically is that conservation in Namibia has been successful, but he has entered a new era in the sense that, yes, we have increased our wildlife, but at the same time, now we are facing with a new dilemma where we have this increase in wildlife and a high density of a human population. The second main finding is that many times we might underestimate the plight of the communities because we do not have a full understanding of the full set of problem-causing species that these communities have to deal with. Similarly, there we also, I didn't share that, but we also found that many of the mitigation measures that are available to these communities might not always be effective, which is an area of continuous research. Another takeaway message is that really conservation must be dynamic, in a sense of saying that when we introduce the concept of conservancies, the premises upon which that tool were established fit that context, but things have evolved and conservation tools must evolve and change as time passes. Essentially, from if we think about the impacts of climate change. And then lastly, is that commodification of natural resources does not necessarily always lead to changing perceptions of the value attributed to natural resources, in the sense of saying that, yes, communities may have benefited and are benefiting from natural resources, and they can attach an instrumental value to these natural resources, but these are not sufficient to translate or to cause a shift or a transition from a purely just instrumental value to intrinsic value, which is important in the field of, in the area of community-based natural resources, because many times the main premise upon which these programs are centralized or based on is really this instrumental value. But if, and with the impact of climate change, the costs start to outweigh the benefits of the communities, then we might face another challenge. So that's another takeaway message, that we do need to incorporate further really this social ecological systems in conservation, because perceptions are important and they need to be addressed. So, and I end with this slide really to say that we do need to include more of the social ecological systems and frameworks when dealing with conservation or assessing the success of conservation approaches. And that is the end of my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ezequiel. It was great. And thanks a lot also to Mariana, who was the one who contacted you at the very beginning, right? And so we have already 2 questions here from the YouTube, and I want to remember and who wants to ask here in the Zoom. I mean, you can write the question in the chat here, or you can open your microphone and ask directly. You can just right there, I want to ask you, and I will let you. And so now can I write, I mean, can I read the question in Portuguese, or do you want me to translate? What do you think?
Okay, you can read in Portuguese.
Yeah. Então, a professora Mariana pergunta como o valor de provisão, né? Provisional value dos recursos terrestres de água doce, turismo, foram calculados, e se é uma iniciativa do governo, da comunidade científica, ou é de uma ONG?
So I'll reply in English, if that's okay.
I think it's okay.
Yeah. So basically, for the provisional values, the study they used historical data on the occurrence of the species, and they also looked at, for example, uses. I would just focus, for example, on the to make it easier just to explain that. Say in the leisure aspect. So they will quantify, for example, how much revenue was accrued in particular areas, and based on that, they will extrapolate that amount into the areas. From the resources perspective, terrestrial resources, that will be a combination basic from forests to all wildlife that is in area, attach values to that, and then based on that, then come up with an estimate of how much that is in monetary terms. I'm not sure if that answers the question. I think you have to.
Sorry, I didn't remember the phone. So she has another question. It is written in English. So, are there direct human-wildlife conflicts, such as attacks to human, as we often see with tigers in India?
Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot to address the second part of the question, whether that was an initiative of the government or not. That was mostly led by an NGO, but I'm not entirely sure if they were working with the government or not when they did the study. I presume that they were. To answer the question about direct human attacks, yes. Sorry, I browsed through that slide, but if yes, there are incidents of direct attacks, or with humans, mostly, but that's mostly with elephants. Very rarely with other species, but they do occur.
Okay. We have one from Fran Braga. What are the main techniques used by the residents in the wildlife retaliation? I suppose that there are lethal and non-lethal techniques, but is some lethal also legal?
No. So depending on so the system or our human wildlife policy has different approaches to deal with conflict. Removal of animals, it is allowed if they pose a direct threat to humans. So here, for example, if there is a lion very close to your homestead and it poses a direct risk to you, then yes, there is room for that. But of course, what's most encouraged is really the use of non-lethal methods. So, for example, which is actually a recommendation from our study as well, is, for example, use of this lion bomas or crawls, which have been implemented already by Panthera in the area, and they have been very successful. So yes, the removal of animals are permissible, but under certain criteria. It's not the first choice that an animal should be removed. Essentially, if it is a species of conservation concern.
Yeah, ok. Só lembrando que também podem fazer as perguntas em português, gente, aqui. Assim, como vocês quiserem. Tem uma aqui, there is one from Wallace Pires de Carvalho. What is the standard approach procedure in dealing with trophy hunters?
So in trophy, so basically there is the government and Trophy Hunter Association, they have a procedure. So basically what happens is for conservation hunting, you will need to apply for a permit, and then you will need then to working together with the in this case here, for example, with the conservancy, you will then to identify a particular animal, and this animal has to meet certain requirements. For example, if it's carnivores, large carnivores, it should not be an animal that's only a prime age. So ensuring that animals have contributed to the next generation. Or if it's an elephant, for example, you will then have to look at the sizes of the tusks. So all those criteria have to be met. When are you on the ground, for example, you also have to show that you do have a license or experience and you always must be accompanied by a local a guide or somebody that has with this that has been or has a local license as well. So it's not a matter that for example a hunter wanting to go for a hunt and it can go by itself. So all those rules, they need to be in place, and then you have to record after the hunt. You also have to provide a report of that was successful or not successful and that sort of thing. So there is this whole application process that they need to follow when for conservation hunting.
Okay. Rita Portela pergunta: Is there wildebeest migration between conservation areas in Namibia? If this is the case, how it is the management of these integrated protected areas?
So migration wildebeest, I'm sorry, I did not show that map. Has been highly it no longer occurs as in the past because the areas that wildebeest occur have highly fragmented with humans in between. So the answer for that is at this point no. But within Namibia, but within other countries, and I'm talking under correction though, so I know that there should be migration between thinking about Casa in area of Casa, probably between, for example, Angola and Zambia. But within Namibia, it is highly fragmented, so there is no migration.
I have two questions actually. One is how you deal with the hunting, with the illegal hunting, if there in the conservation areas. And the second one is about the questionnaire that you did to evaluate the perception. If you could detail a bit more, like it was face to face. Yesterday we were talking just a bit, and you said yes, it was face to face. And I would like to know also how many people do you need to have a good representation?
Okay. So in terms of poaching, so you might have remembered that I think a few years ago, South Africa had a really high number of incidents. So what the government in Namibia did, they highly invested in anti-poaching. So we have anti-poaching units pretty much across the country. We do have some use, for example, sniffing dogs as well to track when they find evidence of that. They also has been changes in terms of legislation, whereby the penalties for illegal hunting have been really increased as well. So, and then there is also a high cooperation between not just the authorities involved in wildlife management, but also with the police and the army. So there's really a very strong interinstitutional task force to try to reduce poaching or illegal hunting, which has been very successful. We do have the numbers of rhinos. We do have incidences, but overall, it's been a very successful operation. Going more a bit of details in terms of the question as to how we collected the data. So basically, what we did is to determine our sample size. We had some background on the number of villages. So we look at villages, the structure, and then we selected households within. So we would select a random village, a random household, for example, in a particular village, and then in an anti-clockwise pick 2 more villages in a random way. And then the target was really to talk to the household sorry, the term escaped my mind. But to the main provider in the house, basically. So either whoever had that task. Interesting enough, in this area, actually most of the household heads were actually ladies. And then we tried always to do our questionnaire early in the morning, because people then had to go to the fields or to resume daily activities. So we always try to catch them early in the morning. We also, because it's to improve the getting a better understanding, we also train community members in the questionnaire to facilitate or overcome the barrier, the language barrier. Yeah, so those were the main aspects of it. And then in terms of questions, for example, not to preempt thoughts, we will basically ask them about the species, but we also had photos, or we will ask them to describe the species, essentially for the smaller animals, because they can at times either give the same name to different species. So we will ask them to also try to describe, and that way we could then have a better understanding of some of the species. Yeah, I think those were some of the things that we tried to address to get the best idea of what was happening on the ground.
Thank you. There is one question from João Paulo Torres, and he asked, are there mountains? If so, how high they are? What about pesticide use? Is malaria very prevalent at the country?
Sorry, the first question is if there are what? Sorry?
Mountains.
Mountains.
Yeah.
Like from a landscape perspective.
Yeah, I think he wants to know if the area is very flat or not.
Okay. Yes, Namibia is fairly flat. mountains are more towards the west part of the country and more to the southern part of the country. So but this area here, the Zambezi area where I'm based, is fairly flat. It is, yes, high malaria area. And then the use of pesticides, that's a hard question to answer. They are used, but to my knowledge, I think we do not probably have a good handle of the intensity by which they are used, but they are used.
Okay. Thank you. Mariana have a question also. What is the role and prominence women in ecology and conservation science in Namibia? Do you have many women colleges at the university and on community-based organization in conservancies? So she wants to know about the role of women there.
So Namibia has adopted what we call the zebra formation, basically trying to have a sort of 50-50 representation of genders. Yes, many of these organizations are actually led by women. So, for example, the National Association for Communal Conservancies, that really oversees and supports all these 80 community conservancies, is actually led by a woman. We do have many other prominent women in other NGOs, like the Integrated Natural Resource NGO as well. So the role of women in conservancies, I would say that it's fairly representative. At the university, yes, we and I'm talking under correction, but actually I do think we have that there's a higher percentage of women than men. At least when talking at the student level, at the management level, we also have a very even distribution. So we do have the answer will be that yes, there is a high representation of women both in leadership positions across different segments of the conservation domain.
So looks better than most of places actually, but we don't have much representation. It's very nice to hear that. And there is another question here. Epaphras, I don't know actually who, I'm sorry, but he or she asked, does shrub encroachment have an effect on wildlife populations in Namibia?
So I presume everybody's familiar with the bush encroachment phenomenon. So basically thickening of bushes. Yes, it does have. Direct will be that it really just decreases habitat for some species, because some species are not really bush oriented. Others, for example, we have found out, for example, for cheetahs, that actually because most of the bush here is very thorny, that some of for cheetahs, for example, their vision is directly affected because some of the thorns actually do get into the side of in their eyes. So, and it also displaces wildlife, because once an area becomes totally encroached, wildlife has to find either suboptimal areas to be, or there's just simply a reduction on a number of wildlife. So yes, so there is an impact of bush encroachment in wildlife.
Okay. Raissa has a question. And how do you think COVID can affect the conservation funding coming from observation, tourism, and trophy hunting?
So COVID has had a major effect on funding, because most of, let me put it this way. So in two ways, let's try to look at it in two ways. So one way is that most of the conservation or the supporting agencies, their funding to be able to assist conservers is really based, is external. On the other hand, or on the other side, conservancies are highly dependent on tourism activities. So yes, there is some diversification of resources, but much is dependent on tourism. So, for example, we have been in a state of emergency for now, I think over 4 months or so, which means, for example, for conservancies, their income base is literally zero. So this has had a massive impact from job security to just basic maintenance of, for example, offices and all that sort of thing. So COVID has been, put much pressure, but at the same time, I think it's on a positive light, I guess one can say that is providing an opportunity to relook at some of the aspects and try to diversify, for example, where possible, to try to minimize the dependency on either international tourism or local tourism as well.
Okay, and Mariana wrote here, you have studied in Brazil. How was that experience? I wanted to ask you the same.
Sure. No, I did enjoy it. Porto Alegre is very cold, but it was really good. I mean, the lab where I worked was very dynamic. So I was under the supervision of Professor Eduardo Ezequiel. Yeah, I mean, people are super friendly, always very helpful. So I'll say it was really good.
And did you have the opportunity to meet other research groups when you were there? Like from other universities?
Yes. So yeah, for example, I was I worked closely with the Carnívoros do Cerrado, that mostly work with foxes and pumas as well. And I also still work with my supervisor down in Porto Alegre. So yeah, I had the opportunity to visit a few other universities while down there.
Nice. Bom, gente, não tem mais alguém quer perguntar alguma coisa? Se alguém quiser falar também. A Mariana fala, thank you so much for the presentation, super interesting. It was indeed.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you, Mariana. So maybe I can stop the YouTube and we can chat a bit here if you want, Mariana, or whoever want to stay here for a bit. Just a second.